What is narrative design and who is narrative designer? Why am I recording this video? So that the next time some studio owner tells you my game doesn't need a story, sorry, you don't have to repeat the whole speech. Basically, narrative design is meaning making and narrative designer is a meaning maker. They can deal with stories, but they deal with much more, and they should deal with much more. Even games like Tetris, they have meaning, and meaning creates story. Part of the meaning is sensation, experience, and then story comes on top, whether you write it or not. But who am I to tell you all this? I'm Ranko. I've been narrative designer, freelance, for over 20 years, with quite a long career in games, starting from being a game journalist, then game designer, game producer, game director. I've been designing board games and tabletop RPGs and stories, of course, for them. Also, I've been involved in traditional storytelling. I have 4 published books, 5th on the way. And I'm somewhat known on LinkedIn for my unusual rants about narrative design and how narrative design is largely misunderstood, especially in today's market when there's a lot of layoffs and a lot of hesitation and basically also incompetence by studios to kind of recognize what really narrative design is. So let me try to clear up who's narrative designer, like what's their job. So what narrative designers actually do. Well, actually, having interviewed over 500 people, maybe closer to 1,000 in the course of this year, I realized that game writer is no longer a separate profession, and it should be. Like, narrative design is not the same as game writing. So narrative designers don't actually write as much. Yes, if you need quest storyline writer or dialogue writer or choice game writer, yeah, this is when narrative designer will also write. But it's also a job for game writer. Narrative designer is essentially a vision holder. So their task, and they're not the only ones with this task, obviously. Pipeline of production is slightly different for each studio because this industry is still young and still needs to find its standardizations. But basically, there are a lot of stakeholders who are interested in holding the vision. Some kind of product owner or chief producer does it from a business side and production side. Then we have some lead game designer who holds it from side of gameplay experience. But narrative designers is kind of a linchpin, because we meddle with all the affairs of all the other departments. Like, are you sure this quest should come before the other one, or should our cooking contest involve meat, because of vegetarians in the audience? Hey, I've come up with some UI UX color scheme. Can you tell us what emotional tone we want to hit here, or like what kind of borders and textures should the feature window be, or like should this feature have a mascot or not? So oftentimes my daily work is not remotely related to writing stories. It's more like intersection between being one of the vision holders for the studio, but also someone who's able to kind of zoom in and also hold the big picture at the same time. For example, one of my clients is doing big rehaul of their mid-game, and basically it's up to us narrative designers to kind of decide what would be fun and what kind of stories we could attach to these mechanics that make it fun. And one would say, oh well, it's a job for game designer. And yeah, it's true. Narrative designer should know game design, should not be just a writer. But in a lot of studios who don't have dedicated narrative people for like storylines and quests and writing, usually game designers will be dealing with balance and other features. So narrative designer, it's also one of our jobs to kind of hold everything together, including some game design elements. Basically what I tell you is that narrative design is not just writing, because writing is pertaining to story, but not every narrative is actually a story. It's not a synonym. Let's take a game like Journey, for example. There's no text, there's no, zero writing, but yeah, a lot of narrative design. Because, as one of the Redditors said, this is the game I go when I want to feel zen. That experience and how the flow of the game will reach this point of zen, that's designed. And rest assured, narrative designers played a part in it. This team who made this game, they actually spent quite a lot of time, like almost a year, just fine-tuning the emotional landscape of that final stage when you reach the end game. Even Tetris has a narrative. Colors, shapes, pacing, the build of tension, and sudden release, it carries a meaning. You may say that's a stretch. Yeah, it is. But if in a studio no one's dedicated to meaning making, and rest assured, oftentimes very few people are dedicated to meaning making, it's up to narrative designer to transform these visions and ideas and goals into actual meaning making. Because the way we perceive this world is basically storytelling. You are now in an episode called Watching Ranko's Video. I'm now in an episode called Ranko is giving a talk, speaking into a camera. So it's simply the way we perceive this world. And from that, stories are quite powerful, not only for communication, but for also interacting with this world. And therefore, because we attach stories to meanings, I would rather say that narrative design is about meaning design. Designing means organized solution. So narrative design, organizing solutions for meaning making and telling stories in games, even if they don't need writing, even if they don't have characters, even if you think it's just abstraction and geometry. So basically, what narrative designers should do is shape players' perception, having a say in what elements should we use and how to impart the meaning to the player. So basically, we are coders of players' perception. We guide them to make sense of everything on the screen. Dialogues and writing maybe it's just like few percent of my work. The real work is getting right that pacing, the tension and release, the sequences, the order of elements which produce meaning, because we make meaning also by watching patterns. So if there is like a message A, message B, and message C, we tend to connect this into a pattern. And these patterns, then we create stories out of them. So also big part of narrative design work is to kind of keep the player immersed. Like once they got in a flow, how to keep them there. And of course, pipelines can be different in a game, but it's always a good practice in the studios to kind of have this really cross-department collaboration. Like we had meetings with art department to kind of let them know what we want story to be about, what kind of emotional sequence we want to have, what kind of tension or release or drama we want to produce. And then of course their input is invaluable because they're also telling a story with their own means, with these visual elements. And of course, narrative designer cannot solely, create all the art, all the audio, all the UI and stuff. But usually every department is like super busy doing their own technical bit, while narrative design is kind of the glue holding it all together. And of course, different games have different types. So for example, there are like social shooters, they're basically, we can call them story making machines, because once you end the round, you're like, oh my god, I have story to tell, something incredible happened this round. Then you have games like Tetris, which are more like toys, where you can add any meaning that you want to a toy. Like if you give a branch to a kid, then they will be like, okay, this branch is now my sword, this branch is now my gun, this branch is now my broom. Kids are really great at meaning making, But then also you can have games with like linear story, like Mafia, where just there's a sequence of between gameplay and narrative, and they're kind of separate. We also are there to support the game design. Like whenever there is a mechanic, a certain mechanic should impart certain feelings, and then narrative should be that feedback that kind of reinforces this feeling and informs the player what's going on. Otherwise, you could have quite abstract and quite unconnected experience for your players. Of course, we can also curate meaning in non-dialogue or non-verbal elements like UI, textures, the iconography, the timing of words, the ambient sounds, or working with different sound talents. So basically, we're there to, make sure everything fits together. Like what specific combination of signals and meanings are potentially alienating to the audience, or like even offensive to the audience. So when someone says, we don't need a story, what they actually mean is we need specific kind of storytelling in our game. And I'm not saying that no one else can do it. I know a lot of game designers and even developers who are amazing at telling stories. But, humbly put, it's our job, it's our task. So I hope you like this first video in our channel. Links, very important links to our Discord server, where we gather a really nice bunch of narrative designers and writers, new and veterans of the industry. We have weekly review sessions, we have guest speakers, we even have game jams. We're sharing career hints and tips. So you can, check the link in the description of this video, or as someone said, doobly-doo. So in the doobly-doo will also be a link to my LinkedIn page, obviously. And you know the drill, like, share, subscribe. We're new, so every little like and every little subscribe, don't forget the bell button, is gonna be very important for us. Thank you and see you in the next one.